The clinking of silverware against china should have been comforting, the familiar sound of family gathered for dinner. But that night, it was the drumbeat to my humiliation. I had barely pulled out my chair when my daughter-in-law's sharp laugh cut through the air. "What's a pauper like you doing here?" she sneered, her voice dripping with mockery. Her eyes flicked around the table, making sure everyone heard. Then she lifted a manicured hand and called, "Security, get this woman away from the table." For a second, I thought I'd misheard. Surely she wouldn't dare. But then 2 uniformed men appeared at the edge of the room, shifting uncertainly as if waiting for confirmation. The chatter around the table stopped cold. My son's face drained of color, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. My grandchildren stared wide-eyed. The other guests glanced at one another, some smirking, some horrified, no one speaking. Heat rose in my cheeks, but not from shame. No, it was anger kept carefully in check. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to stand without trembling. If she thought she'd broken me, she was wrong. I looked her straight in the eye, and for the briefest moment, her smug smile faltered. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply adjusted my shawl, stepped back, and walked away, because I knew something she didn't. She believed I was powerless, a nuisance clinging to a seat I no longer deserved. But behind my silence was a truth that would unravel her entire world. If you were in my place that night, what would you have done? Would you have spoken up immediately, or stayed quiet, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? Share your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know. The ride home from that humiliating dinner was quiet, but my mind was loud. I replayed every smirk, every snicker, every cruel syllable that spilled from my daughter-in-law's lips. Pauper. That word echoed, not because it was true, but because of how confidently she believed it. She thought I was nothing, a burden, someone unworthy of respect. She thought she had won, but she didn't know the story behind the woman she mocked. She had no idea that the pauper sitting across from her had once built the very empire that now paid for her fancy handbags and sparkling jewelry. I met my late husband Richard when we were both young and stubborn dreamers. He had a knack for numbers. I had a knack for people. Together, we took a failing supply company and grew it, brick by brick, into a powerhouse that fed hundreds of families. Long nights at the office, countless sacrifices, and risks that could have ruined us, those were the foundations of the company. And though Richard's name often appeared on the contracts, my hands were just as deep in the soil. When he died, it felt like the ground opened beneath me. I lost my partner, my compass, the man who believed in me when no one else did. After the funeral, I stepped back. My heart wasn't in boardrooms or balance sheets anymore. I wanted to grieve in peace. I still held my shares, my authority, but I didn't flaunt it. My son, David, thought it best to let others manage the company. And when his wife, Cassandra, showed interest in helping, I didn't object. At the time, I thought giving her responsibility might ground her, give her purpose. I couldn't have been more wrong. Cassandra strutted into the company like a queen entering her court. She loved the title of manager, loved the attention, loved telling people what to do, but she didn't love the work. The first time I visited the office after she was promoted, I noticed the way employees stiffened when she walked past, the way conversations died as soon as she entered a room. She didn't inspire loyalty, she commanded fear. She developed a habit of reminding everyone that she was family, that she had direct access to the top. I heard stories of her ridiculing staff for the smallest mistakes, threatening to fire people without cause, and bragging about her so-called indispensability. She treated meetings like stages, showing off her designer clothes and expensive taste, as though leadership was about appearances and not decisions. At first, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was nervous. Maybe she was just trying too hard. But the truth revealed itself over time. Cassandra wasn't nervous, she was power-hungry, and worse, she had no respect for me. I remember one afternoon, I arrived quietly to deliver documents to the boardroom. Cassandra was already there, laughing with 2 other managers. "She's practically useless now," she said, not realizing I stood just behind the door. She had her time. Now she's just hanging around for scraps. Honestly, I don't know why David insists on keeping her involved. She should just fade away already. How? The managers didn't respond, but they also didn't defend me. They just nodded awkwardly, clearly afraid of crossing her. I walked away that day with my hands trembling. Not because her words hurt, though they did, but because I saw how unchecked her arrogance had become. At family gatherings, it only grew worse. Cassandra made snide comments about my clothes, my outdated opinions, even the way I folded napkins. She belittled me in front of my grandchildren, calling me old-fashioned and out of touch. My son, bless his heart, often looked uncomfortable, but rarely challenged her outright. I knew he was stuck, torn between his loyalty to me and his devotion to his wife. Still, Cassandra believed she had all the power. She thought that because she was a manager at the company, because she could boss people around and sign paperwork, she was untouchable. She mistook visibility for control. What she didn't realize was that while she had a title, I still had the throne. My shares made me the majority owner. My voice still carried the final say. I chose silence. I let her bask in her delusion. I let her humiliate me at dinners, dismiss me in meetings, talk down to me at family gatherings, because patience is a weapon. And when the time came, I wanted her to feel the full weight of the truth. The night she called me a pauper at the family dinner was not the first insult, but it was the loudest. It was the moment everyone in the room saw her cruelty laid bare. And instead of breaking me, it fueled me. As I sat in my quiet living room later that night, I thought about Richard. I imagined his hand on mine, the way he used to say, "Sometimes the best move is to let them think they're winning until the checkmate." He was right. Cassandra thought she'd cornered me. She thought she had stripped me of dignity. What she didn't know was that she'd handed me the perfect setup. The next morning, I went into my study, unlocked the drawer where I kept all the old files, and pulled out the original agreements. My name was still there, my shares, my rights, everything Cassandra had ignored. She wasn't married to a company puppet, she was married into the family of its true owner. As I ran my fingers across the ink, I felt a calm determination settle over me. This wasn't just about teaching Cassandra a lesson. This was about restoring balance, about showing her, and everyone else, that arrogance built on lies will always collapse. I decided then and there that her reign of mockery was ending. She had laughed at me for the last time. Tell me if you were me. Would you have revealed the truth right then, in front of the whole family? Or would you have waited for the perfect moment at the company to strike? I'm curious, comment below with what you would have done. The days after that dinner were some of the longest of my life. Outwardly, I went about my routine like nothing had happened. I watered the plants in my garden, smiled politely at neighbors, and answered my son's calls with the same steady voice. But inside, a storm was gathering. Cassandra's smug laughter echoed in my ears each night, and the word pauper gnawed at me until I finally decided enough was enough. If she wanted to act like the queen of my empire, I would remind her whose crown she was wearing. The first step was observation. I began visiting the company more often, under the pretense of dropping by to see how things were going. Cassandra brushed me off whenever she saw me, offering condescending smiles and chirping, "Don't worry, I've got everything under control." She truly believed I was meddling out of boredom, that I had no authority left. But what she didn't notice was how carefully I was watching. One morning, I arrived just before 9 and sat quietly in the corner of the lobby. From there, I saw Cassandra sweep in 30 minutes late, clutching her designer handbag, barking at the receptionist for not having her coffee ready. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply acted as though the world should bend to her schedule. Later that week, I positioned myself near the break room, listening as employees whispered. "She cut our overtime again," one murmured. "But she just approved a company, paid retreat for herself and her friends," another replied. Their voices were low, nervous, but their resentment was unmistakable. They didn't know I was within earshot, scribbling notes in a small, leather-bound journal. I started gathering accounts from those who trusted me. A young accountant pulled me aside one afternoon, his hands trembling. "She forced me to alter numbers last month," he confessed. "I didn't want to, but she threatened to fire me if I didn't make the quarterly report look stronger." His words confirmed what I had suspected. Cassandra wasn't just arrogant, she was dangerous to the company. I met with several employees quietly, in the cafeteria or during late evenings when the office was nearly empty. One after another, they shared stories. Cassandra berating a secretary for a typo in an email. Cassandra approving vendor contracts that benefited her personal friends. Cassandra taking credit for projects she had no hand in. The picture became clearer each day. She wasn't leading, she was exploiting. The breaking point came when I overheard her in the hallway, talking to another manager. "Honestly," she scoffed, "I don't know why my husband still clings to his mother. She's useless. All she does is sit around with her dusty papers. I'm the future of this company." That was it. She wasn't just undermining me in private, she was spreading her venom through the very walls I had helped build. I decided it was time to act, but carefully. One reckless move, and she could twist the narrative, painting me as a bitter old woman jealous of her success. No, I needed undeniable proof. So I enlisted the help of people I trusted. An old colleague, Samuel, who had worked with Richard and me since the beginning, agreed to quietly gather official complaints that had been buried. He found memos, ignored HR reports, and email chains where Cassandra dismissed valid concerns with a wave of her hand. Each piece of paper was another brick in the wall I was building around her. I also spoke to the board members individually. Most of them hadn't realized the depth of Cassandra's behavior because she put on a polished front during meetings. But when I showed them the accounts from employees and hinted at financial irregularities, their eyebrows furrowed. "If what you say is true," one of them muttered, "she could be a liability." That was exactly the word I wanted to hear, liability. I knew I couldn't rush. Cassandra's downfall had to be public, undeniable, and complete. It wasn't enough for her to lose face at a family dinner. No, she needed to face the people she had mistreated. She needed to be stripped of the illusion of power in the very place she had abused it. In the evenings, I would sit at my desk, spreading the documents across the surface like puzzle pieces. Financial records, testimonies, reports, it all told the same story of arrogance and neglect. I could almost hear Richard's voice beside me. "Line up your evidence like chess pieces. Wait for her to make the fatal move." The fatal move came sooner than I expected. Cassandra approved a massive order from an unreliable supplier, cutting corners to make herself look efficient. The order collapsed within weeks, costing the company a significant sum. The employees were furious, but too afraid to voice their anger openly. That failure became the final nail in the coffin. I knew then that the stage was set. Still, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even bitter. I was focused. There's a strange clarity that comes when you know you're about to take back control. Cassandra had called me a pauper. She had laughed at me in front of my family. She had treated employees like disposable tools. She thought she was untouchable. But I was about to show her, and everyone else, that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It waits quietly, patiently, until the perfect moment to reveal its strength. Tell me, have you ever worked with someone who believed they were above everyone else, only to watch their arrogance bring them down? Share your story in the comments. I want to know if you've seen the same downfall I was preparing to deliver. The evidence was in my hands, but evidence alone doesn't win battles. Timing does. I needed the perfect moment to reveal the truth, to shatter Cassandra's illusion of control in front of the people she lorded over every day. And so, I waited. I met with Samuel again, late one evening in his office. He laid out a stack of folders thick with paperwork. "This is more than enough," he said, pushing them toward me. "Financial irregularities, ignored complaints, hostile work environment claims. If the board sees this, they'll have no choice but to act." I nodded, my fingers brushing the top of the pile. Each folder felt heavy with the voices of people Cassandra had silenced. "Thank you," I whispered. "But we cannot rush this. If she senses even a hint of what's coming, she'll spin it into her narrative. She's good at pretending to be the victim." Samuel leaned back, studying me. "You've always been patient, Margaret, but don't wait too long. The company needs leadership, and she's steering it toward ruin." His words echoed in my mind that night as I sat in my study. The clock ticked steadily, but I hardly noticed. Instead, I reviewed the documents again and again, memorizing every line, rehearsing how I would present them. I wasn't just planning to correct a mistake. I was preparing to dismantle Cassandra's empire of arrogance piece by piece. The next morning, I walked into the office dressed simply but deliberately. A navy blazer, the same one Richard used to say made me look like I owned the place. I wanted Cassandra to see that image again. I wanted her to feel the weight of what she had overlooked. She noticed me immediately. "Oh, Margaret," she said with a forced smile. "You don't have to bother yourself with office matters. We've got it under control." Her tone dripped with condescension, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes. "Do you now?" I replied softly, letting the question hang in the air. Her smirk returned. "Of course. I've been running things smoothly. Everyone's happier than ever." I didn't argue. I simply offered a polite nod and walked past her, because in a matter of days, that smirk would vanish. Behind the scenes, I worked with the board to arrange a special meeting. Officially, it was to discuss recent financial challenges. Unofficially, it was Cassandra's reckoning. Every member would be present, and employees were invited to hear the leadership's plan. That detail was important. I didn't want Cassandra humiliated in private. No, I wanted the people she had belittled to see the truth with their own eyes. The days leading up to the meeting were tense. Cassandra continued her charade, strutting around the office, signing papers with a flourish, snapping at assistants. But I noticed something new. Whispers followed her. Eyes lingered a little longer. Employees sensed that change was coming, though they didn't yet know what form it would take. At home, my son called me one evening. "Mom, Cassandra said you've been snooping around the office. She's worried you're trying to undermine her." His voice was hesitant, torn between concern and loyalty. I smiled into the receiver, though he couldn't see it. "David, I'm not undermining anyone. I'm protecting what your father and I built. One day you'll understand." He sighed, but didn't press further. I knew he loved me, but Cassandra's grip on him was strong. Soon, though, that grip would loosen. The night before the meeting, I barely slept. I paced my living room, rehearsing my words. I didn't want to sound bitter or vengeful. That wasn't the lesson. I wanted to sound steady, resolute, and above all, just. Richard's voice rang in my memory once more. "Make them see the truth for themselves." Morning came, and with it, the moment of truth. The conference room buzzed with chatter as employees filed in, curious about the unusual gathering. Cassandra sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her smile wide. She relished the attention, clearly believing this was her stage to shine. When I entered, a hush fell. Some employees straightened in their chairs, surprised to see me there. Cassandra's smile faltered, but quickly returned. "Mother-in-law," she said brightly, "how kind of you to join us. We're discussing strategies today, but I'm sure your perspective will be quaint." Her words stung, but I didn't let it show. I placed my folders on the table, their edges crisp and unyielding. "Actually, Cassandra, today we are discussing you." Her face froze, confusion flickering across her features. "Me?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Surely you're joking." I opened the first folder, sliding papers across the table toward the board members. "These are records of financial mismanagement under your watch. Unauthorized spending, falsified reports, supplier contracts that benefited your personal connections." Murmurs rippled through the room. Cassandra's eyes darted from one face to another, searching for, "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "You're twisting things. You've always resented me." I met her gaze calmly. "This isn't about resentment, it's about responsibility. And as the majority shareholder of this company, it is my responsibility to act." Gasps echoed around the table. Cassandra's jaw dropped. She hadn't known. She truly thought I was powerless. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. Cassandra fumbled for words, but nothing came. And in that silence, I knew I had won the first round. The stage was set. Tomorrow, the board would convene formally to vote on her position. But in that moment, everyone in the room already knew. The so-called pauper was the queen, and the queen was about to strike. The boardroom smelled faintly of polished wood and strong coffee that morning. The long table gleamed under the overhead lights, and every chair was filled. Employees crowded along the walls, whispering nervously, unsure why they had been invited to this extraordinary meeting. The atmosphere was taut, charged, as though everyone sensed that something irreversible was about to happen. I sat near the head of the table, my folders neatly stacked before me. My blazer was buttoned, my posture straight, my gaze unwavering. It had been years since I had taken such a prominent place in a company meeting, but the familiarity came back like muscle memory. This was my domain. This was Richard's and my legacy. Across from me sat Cassandra. She wore a cream silk blouse, diamonds glittering at her ears, her hair perfectly styled. She looked like she was preparing for a photo shoot, not a professional reckoning. Her lips curved into a practiced smile, but her eyes betrayed her. I saw the flicker of unease, the way her fingers drummed nervously against the table's surface. The chairman, a man who had served on the board since the early days of our company, cleared his throat. "We are here to discuss recent concerns regarding management practices. Mrs. Sullivan has requested to address the board directly." He gestured toward me. I rose slowly, allowing the silence to settle. The room stilled, all eyes turning toward me. I could feel Cassandra's glare burning, but I did not look at her. My focus was on the people who mattered: the employees, the board, the lifeblood of the company. "Thank you," I began, my voice calm but carrying. "This company was built on sweat, sacrifice, and trust. Richard and I poured our lives into it, not for glory, but to create something that would endure, something that would provide for families, create jobs, and leave a mark of integrity on every contract signed." I let the words linger before continuing. "In recent years, that integrity has been tested. Decisions have been made not with the company's well-being in mind, but for personal gain. Employees have been mistreated, their voices ignored. Financial reports have been manipulated. Vendor contracts have been awarded not on merit, but on favoritism. These are not rumors, these are facts." A murmur rippled through the room. Cassandra's face reddened. "This is slander," she burst out. "You're twisting stories because you've never liked me." I finally turned my gaze on her. "This isn't about liking you. This is about protecting what Richard and I built. And the truth, Cassandra, is that you have abused the privilege of working here." I opened the first folder and slid the documents across the table toward the board members. They leaned forward, scanning the pages, emails, signed approvals, records of expenses that bore Cassandra's signature. The evidence was overwhelming. "You manipulated quarterly reports," I said evenly. "You authorized company funds for personal vacations disguised as retreats. You berated employees publicly, creating a hostile work environment. You ignored HR complaints that documented your behavior in detail." The whispers grew louder. Employees along the wall exchanged glances, some nodding, some smirking at the sight of Cassandra squirming. They had endured her cruelty. Now they were seeing justice. Cassandra slammed her hand against the table. "You don't have the authority to accuse me of anything. I'm the manager here, and you're just..." "Just what?" I interrupted softly, my voice cutting through the noise. "Just an old woman? Just a pauper? That's what you called me at the family dinner, isn't it?" Gasps filled the room. Cassandra froze, her mouth hanging open. I reached into my folder and pulled out the final set of papers. "What you failed to realize, Cassandra, is that while you may hold a title, I hold the power. I am the majority shareholder of this company. My signature is the one that keeps these doors open. My voice is the final authority." Number 5. The room erupted in whispers, shock ricocheting from wall to wall. Board members stared, wide-eyed, as though they were seeing me for the first time. Employees straightened, some smiling, some barely containing their laughter. Cassandra's face drained of color. You can't be serious," she stammered. "Oh, I'm very serious," I replied, my tone unyielding. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your position as manager. You are not fired. You will not be allowed to claim victimhood by saying I ended your career. No, Cassandra, you will remain here, but in a role that better suits your arrogance. You will report to the kitchen staff starting tomorrow morning. Your new position will be dishwasher." The room exploded. Gasps, laughter, even a few cheers broke out from the employees. Board members struggled to hide their astonishment. One leaned back, shaking his head in disbelief, while another scribbled furiously in his notebook as though to memorialize the moment. Cassandra's jaw worked soundlessly. You can't do this to me," she whispered. I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers. "I already have. This company will no longer be poisoned by your cruelty. You wanted to humiliate me in front of my family. Now you stand humiliated in front of the very people you claim to lead." And her diamond earrings trembled as she shook her head violently. "David will never forgive you," she spat. "He'll hate you for this." I drew in a steady breath. If David hates me for protecting the company his father and I built, then so be it. But I suspect, in time, he'll see the truth. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, a young employee at the back began to clap. Others joined in, hesitant at first, then stronger. The applause grew until it filled the room. washing over Cassandra's pale, furious face. She stumbled back into her chair, her manicured hands gripping the armrests as though they could anchor her in a storm she had never seen coming. But there was no anchor strong enough to stop what had just been set in motion. I raised my hand, and the clapping subsided. "Let this be a reminder," I said firmly. "Arrogance has no place here. This company was built on respect. It will return to those roots. Every employee here deserves to be treated with dignity. That era begins again today." The employees nodded, some wiping tears, some smiling with relief. They had been waiting for someone to stand up for them, and now they had their answer. Cassandra sat frozen, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came. She was silenced, not by me, but by the truth, and by the undeniable weight of her own actions. If you had been in that room, watching her fall from her throne in one brutal stroke, what would you have done? Would you have cheered for justice, or pitied her humiliation? Share your thoughts. I'd love to know where your heart lands. The silence after the meeting carried into my home that evening like an unwelcome shadow. I thought perhaps Cassandra would storm out, disappear into hiding for a while, but she did not. Instead, she came directly to my house. I heard the sharp knock at the door before I even had a chance to sit down. When I opened it, Cassandra stood there, no longer polished and composed. Her eyes were red, her makeup smudged, her blouse wrinkled as though she had been wringing her hands all afternoon. "Please," she said, her voice breaking. "Please don't do this to me. You've embarrassed me in front of everyone. You've destroyed everything I've worked for." I let the door stay open, but did not invite her in. I folded my arms and studied her carefully. "Destroyed everything you've worked for?" I repeated. "Cassandra, you did that yourself." I only revealed the truth. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she shook her head violently. I was under pressure. People expected me to lead. I had to prove myself. I made mistakes. Yes, but don't you see? I was trying to live up to this family's name. Her words might have carried weight if I had not spent months watching her tear people down to build herself up. Living up to the family name, I said quietly, does not mean humiliating others. It does not mean twisting numbers or ignoring people's pain. You have disgraced the family name, Cassandra, not honored it. She dropped to her knees on the porch, clutching the hem of my skirt. "I'll do better," she sobbed. "Just give me another chance. Please. I'll be good to you. I'll respect you. Just don't make me do this." For a moment, I almost pitied her. But then I remembered the faces of the employees she had ridiculed, the sting of her laughter at the dinner table, the way my grandchildren had looked at me with confusion when she called me a pauper. My pity hardened into resolve. "I already gave you chances," I said firmly, "and each time you chose arrogance over humility. Now you will learn humility, the only way left." At that moment, David appeared behind her. He had parked in the driveway and rushed over when he saw her collapsed at my feet. "Mom, what are you doing?" he demanded, pulling Cassandra to her feet. "This is too much. She's your daughter-in-law. She's my wife. You can't treat her like this." I met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I am not treating her like anything, David. I am holding her accountable. Something you should have done long ago." David's jaw tightened. "She made mistakes, but you're humiliating her. Demoting her to dishwasher? That's cruel." Behind him, my eldest granddaughter spoke up. She had been standing in the doorway, listening. "Dad, I saw how she treated Grandma at the dinner. I saw how she treated the workers at the company. She deserves it." The family was split. My son clung to his loyalty to his wife, unable to separate love from responsibility. My granddaughter, young but sharp, recognized justice when she saw it. Others weighed in over the next few days, siblings, cousins, even extended relatives. Some whispered that I had gone too far. Others said they wished they had the courage to do the same if they were in my shoes. Meanwhile, at the company, the fallout was swift. Employees who had been silent for so long suddenly felt free to speak. Stories poured out Cassandra's temper tantrums, her public insults, her unfair punishments. Each story only confirmed that my decision had been right. Yet Cassandra continued to plead. She left voicemails filled with desperate apologies, letters slipped under my door begging for forgiveness. She even approached other board members, trying to convince them to pressure me into reversing the demotion. But the more she begged, the less dignity she retained, and the clearer it became that she had never understood true responsibility in the first place. One evening, after another long day of listening to relatives debate and hearing Cassandra's cries echo in my ears, I sat alone in the kitchen with a cup of tea. I thought of Richard again. What would he have said? I imagined him, leaning back in his chair, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You don't have to fight her, Margaret. Just let the truth fight for you. It always wins. I realized then that the truth had already spoken. Cassandra's tears, her desperation, her crumbling mask, those were not signs of injustice. They were signs of arrogance finally meeting its consequence. If you were in my position, watching your daughter-in-law crumble after humiliating you so many times, would you have pitied her or stood your ground? Share your thoughts. I want to know how you would have handled that moment. The following week was chaos. Cassandra arrived at the company in the morning, her heels clicking across the marble floor, head held high as though nothing had changed. She ignored the new assignment slip that HR had prepared for her, tossing it into the trash. Instead, she marched straight to the manager's office she had once occupied. When she tried to open the door, however, she found it locked. A new nameplate gleamed on the wood. Her replacement had already moved in. The sight knocked the wind out of her. Employees watched from their desks, pretending to type but unable to hide their curiosity. Cassandra's face twisted with rage. She stormed down the hallway, shouting, "This is my office. I'm the manager here. You can't just take it from me." The murmurs started, low but steady. "She still doesn't get it," someone whispered. Another chuckled, "Didn't she hear? She's in the kitchen now." Oh, when she finally reached the cafeteria, the head of the kitchen staff, a stout woman named Marlene, handed her an apron. "You'll be working with us today. Start with the dishes. There's a pile waiting." Cassandra recoiled as though the fabric burned her skin. "I will not lower myself to this," she shrieked. "Do you know who I am?" Marlene crossed her arms. "We all know who you are. That's why you're here." The employees in the cafeteria erupted in laughter. Cassandra's cheeks flushed crimson. She threw the apron to the floor and bolted from the room, her dignity shredding with every step. That evening, she came to my house again, this time with David beside her. His arm was around her shoulders, his face hard. "Mom, enough is enough," he said sternly. "You've humiliated her at work. You've stripped her of everything. This isn't justice anymore, it's cruelty." I set down my teacup and looked at my son. "David, do you know how many employees quit because of her? Do you know how many cried in bathrooms because of her insults? She's not the victim here. She's simply experiencing what she made others feel." Cassandra sobbed into David's chest. "She's lying. None of that happened. They're exaggerating because they're jealous." But even as she spoke, her voice lacked conviction. David shifted uncomfortably, torn between his wife's tears and the truth he didn't want to admit. The next day, several employees requested a private meeting with him. They shared their stories, emails Cassandra had written, insults she had hurled, threats she had made. One young woman tearfully confessed that Cassandra had told her, "You'll never be good enough for this company. Maybe you should just quit before you embarrass yourself further." David returned home that night quieter than usual. He avoided my eyes at dinner, but I could see the storm in his mind. Cassandra noticed too. Her pleas grew more desperate. She followed him around the house, clutching his arm, whispering that everyone was lying, that I had poisoned them against her. But the harder she fought, the clearer it became that the lies were hers. By the end of the week, the family itself had split down the middle. Some defended her, insisting she was misunderstood. Others were tired of her dramatics and openly sided with me. At a Sunday lunch, the tension reached its peak. My nephew slammed his fork on the table and said, "She's reaping what she sowed. Why are we even arguing about this?" Cassandra turned on him, her face wild. "You don't know anything. You're all against me. You're jealous of me." Her outburst silenced the room. For the first time, David's expression hardened not at me, but at her. He pushed back his chair and said, "Enough, Cassandra. Just stop." She froze, stunned by the shift. Her eyes darted around the table, seeking an ally. None met her gaze. Even those who had defended her earlier now looked away, ashamed to have been deceived by her performance. That night, she packed a suitcase and left for her sister's house. No one tried to stop her. The employees carried on with relief, the family breathed easier, and the company began to heal. I sat in my living room, hands folded, staring at the quiet space where Richard used to sit. "We did it," I whispered into the silence. "She can't hurt them anymore." End of chapter. But even in that victory, I knew one final chapter remained. Because arrogance doesn't simply disappear, it lingers, waiting for another chance. And I intended to make sure Cassandra never found one again. If you had watched her unravel screaming in the office, sobbing at home, lashing out at family, would you have felt sympathy or satisfaction? Comment below and tell me where your heart falls. The house was quiet again. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt peace settling into the walls. Cassandra had packed her things and stormed off to her sister's place, leaving David behind in a fog of confusion and silence. I didn't rejoice in her absence, but I didn't mourn it either. Some absences are gifts disguised as losses. At the company, the change was immediate. The air seemed lighter, conversations more relaxed. Employees who had once walked with their heads down now greeted each other openly in the hallways. Laughter returned to the cafeteria. Productivity rose not because people were scared, but because they finally felt valued. Watching it unfold reminded me of the days when Richard and I first built the company, when trust was our foundation. One morning, as I walked through the office, a young woman approached me. Her hands shook as she held out a small thank you card. "You saved my job," she whispered. "You saved all of us." Tears glistened in her eyes. I squeezed her hand and told her the truth. "You saved yourself by staying strong. I only cleared the path." Even board members who had been skeptical admitted later that they hadn't realized how deep Cassandra's toxicity ran. "You were right," one confessed. "She was poisoning the well." I only nodded. I didn't need their validation. The evidence and Cassandra's own collapse had already spoken louder than any words could. At home, David avoided the subject for a while. He moved around like a man carrying two worlds on his shoulders. One evening, as we sat at the dinner table, he finally broke the silence. "I should have seen it," he said, his voice heavy. "I should have protected you from her." I placed my hand over his. "You loved her," I said gently. "Love blinds us sometimes. What matters is what you see now." End quote. His eyes brimmed with tears. "Do you think she'll ever change?" I thought about it carefully. Cassandra had been given countless opportunities at work, at home, at that dinner table. Each time, she chose pride. Each time, she chose cruelty. Could someone like that truly change? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing. Change is possible, I said. But only if she wants it. And wanting it means accepting the consequences of her actions. Until then, she'll stay the same. For a long moment, he was silent. Then he nodded, the weight in his shoulders easing just slightly. In the weeks that followed, Cassandra's absence became less of a wound and more of a scar visible, but no longer bleeding. The family healed slowly. We shared meals without tension. Laughter returned to the table, and the grandchildren no longer looked around nervously, waiting for sharp words to fly. I often sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Richard's chair remained beside mine, empty but not lonely. I imagined him there, proud of how I had carried our legacy forward, proud of how I had defended the values we built together. This entire ordeal had taught me something important. Arrogance collapses under its own weight. Cassandra believed power came from intimidation and appearances. But real power is quiet, steady, and just. Real power does not need to humiliate. It simply reveals the truth and lets the truth do the rest. I wasn't a pauper. I was the queen she underestimated. And in underestimating me, she sealed her own downfall. So I ask you, if someone publicly humiliated you, mocked you, and tore at your dignity, would you forgive them if they begged afterward? Or would you let them live with the consequences of their cruelty? Comment below. I want to hear how you would close such a chapter. And if you want to hear more family revenge stories like this one, full of twists, heartbreak, and justice served, make sure you subscribe. There are plenty more stories to tell, and each one carries a lesson that might just surprise you.